Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to give you lots of tips for painting white fur. Now these tips can be applied to anything white, but today I'm going to focus on white curls as, in my opinion, they are one of the most difficult type of fur to paint. If you find this helpful here on YouTube, then please do hit that subscribe button. I've also got lots of full-length tutorials over on my Patreon, including the little dog that I'm going to share with you today. I love painting the illusion of white, as often it's got very little pure white involved. And today I want to try and open your eyes to the possibilities of using lots of colours to depict white. Because when we look at something, our brain might tell us that it's a white object, but when we really look, can we see anything else? For example, in my white top that I'm wearing, I've got daylight coming from my right side, which is of course creating very bright coloured highlights. But then where we've got shadow tones, there's a lot more colour in this white top than you would first think. And if you were painting it, you would have to use these darker shadow colours in order to make that bright area really shine out. So white, in fact, makes a bit of a mirror for all of the surrounding colours and whatever the light is doing. And that is where the magic lies in painting. There is no rule that says you have to use any pure white when you're painting something white. In my most recent painting of Artie the Bichon Frise, I knew it was going to be a challenge to show all of these white curls. How can we show the definition in the curls when they're all so light? Well, to show definition in anything, there must be contrast. And I'm going to show you how I create that contrast while still creating the illusion of white fur. The first thing that I will mention is that the photo reference you paint from can either make this incredibly difficult or a bit easier. How your photograph is lit will be the key to this. So here are a few examples of where my white subject was lit by bright sunlight. This creates dramatic contrast between the light and shade areas, and quite often the sunlit areas are easy because they almost appear overexposed. The place you have to put more colour is usually in the shadows. And I find this type of reference image much easier to deal with than if the subject is lit with more flat lighting. Anytime I've had to paint white animals in flat lighting, so no definite light and shade, it's always much harder. And that's because for me, there's no hiding behind the illusion of the contrast in the other type of reference image. Here we've got evenly lit curls all over, meaning that there's detail just everywhere. So with more dramatic lighting in your photo reference, you can actually avoid some of the hard work of adding all of that detail. And now that is especially apparent when painting white curls. Instead of the dog having one big area of shadow, each clump of curls casts a little shadow. And instead of having a brightly lit area on the dog that I can pretty much just block in because it's too bright to show the definition in the curls, I have evenly lit curls all over. So my advice is often to use reference photos that have good contrasted lighting. The more obvious the light and shade is in the reference image, the easier it usually is to see the colour differences. And that's one of the reasons that I love to paint sunlight, because quite often it makes those colour differences more exaggerated, more obvious. Whereas when you're dealing with flat lighting, those colour differences are going to be so subtle. And Artie's portrait here is the perfect one to show you what I mean, because I'm not sure I've ever used this number of light tints in one painting before. So here is my palette for Artie's fur. While I did use pure white, it was reserved for highlighting the very brightest curls. In the past, where my eyes may have seen grey tones in the shadows, which can lead to quite a muddy and slightly flat appearance, now I see a full spectrum of colours in there. Now the word grey means something else to me, because I can have a pink grey, a blue grey, a green grey. So let's have a look at my light tints from this piece. Firstly, I want to show you how bright they all are when applied to a dark surface. You can see why these are all light tints. But what happens if I put the same row of colours on a white sheet? Compared to pure white, it becomes obvious how much colour is in these tints. And that is where the magic lies in painting, because the colours you put down will automatically look brighter if they're surrounded by darker colours. So if you can't get your whites to look any brighter, sometimes what you need to do is darken your values surrounding them. And that is how I try to think about white curls like this. The lighting is subtle, but there is shadow in there. I try to reserve the pure white for the absolute brightest areas. Sometimes it helps to look at your photo reference in grayscale, as that can help to show up the tonal values better. But everywhere that is not quite the brightest value is swapped for one of these tints. For example, there's a bit of slightly cool light hitting his back here, and I'm using my pale blue tints. There's less light reaching the front of his chest, and I'm using a mixture of the blues and warmer greys and peachy creams. Absolutely no pure white in this area to give a sense of the shadow. But in the grand scheme of things, all of these colours read as a white dog when you step back. On the layers underneath, I have to use something darker so that these tints can all show up. That's where my next row of colours come in, the midtones. Can you see how some of these are related to the tints above? The midtones are what I use a lot on the base layer. It's the skin underneath the fur, it's the shadows being cast by the fur itself, and it's vital to the definition of the curls on top. Then one step darker again, and we have the darkest shadow colours, because even on a white dog in flat lighting, we will have some dark shadows somewhere. Under the chin, under the body and the legs, there is almost always some kind of dark value in the darkest shadows. Browns, purples, deep fleshy tones. Just remember that the darker tones are vital to making your lighter tones look brighter. In fact, my best advice for when you're painting something white is to completely forget that it's a white dog or whatever it is. Don't let your brain think about that at all. Just look with your eyes and really analyze what it is that you're seeing without the expectation of seeing pure white. And I just want to take a second to point out how little I have bothered to shape and define each individual curl on Artie. I'm much more about creating the overall texture, and when the correct colours and values are used, I can take quite a lot of artistic license in the detail that I put into each curl. In fact, up close, I would say a lot of my curls are just squiggles and colourful marks. I'm painting clumps of hair rather than individual hairs. But again, it's enough to read as curly fur when you step back. So if you'd like further help with painting white animals, I have lots of real-time tutorials over on my Patreon, perfect for working along with and learning all about colour choices. But here on YouTube, I also have a huge selection of videos to help you with colour theory and tonal value, things that I've mentioned a lot in this video. My colour theory playlist goes into a lot more detail on these topics and hopefully breaks it down into understandable information. Because colour theory does not have to be complicated. The small parts of colour theory that I make use of are simple once you grasp them, and they truly were game changers in my art. I've had the absolute joy of seeing colour click with so many artists over on my Patreon channel, and I hope that I can do the same for you. So please do consider checking me out over on Patreon. Also, a huge thanks to my existing patrons, without whom none of these YouTube videos would exist. So I'm very grateful for all of their support. But if you've enjoyed this here and you haven't already, then please do hit that subscribe button, as that also supports me a lot. But thanks very much for watching, and until next time, happy pasteling.